Mannix and Mora. I'm Chris Mannix. He is the former junior middleweight champion, Sergio Mora. On this episode, we are going to talk about Sebastian Fundora's successful return to the ring, George Kambosos' win in Australia, a potential Jake Paul against Anthony Joshua fight, plus some thoughts on Terrence Crawford's recent comments about his place in boxing history if he's able to pull off the upset against Canelo Alvarez in September. Plus, we'll take some of your questions from social media at the end of the show. But we have to start, Sergio, with the sad news that George Foreman, the former heavyweight champion, passed away last week at the age of 76. Foreman was an Olympic gold medalist who had two reigns as heavyweight champ, one from 73 to 74, another from 94 to 95. 2 decades later, he was a heavyweight champ when he became the oldest heavyweight champion in boxing history. Around that time, he became a cultural icon with the introduction of the George Foreman grill, which has sold over 100 million units. I had a couple of them over the years, and earned Foreman somewhere in the neighborhood of $250 million in overall revenue. I know you were fighting Sergio around the time that George was commentating. Did you ever have any interactions with him? Anything you'd like to share about Big George?
I had an incredible conversation with him in the back, inside a limo when we were recording The Contender. It was me and a handful of fighters. We were going to a barbecue, and George Foreman was our host. It was one-on-one. It was intimate. We all got to ask questions that we were interested in, and of course, I asked him about the grill. I mean, everyone was asking him about Muhammad Ali, and everyone was asking about George Frazier and who was the hardest puncher, and Ron Lyle. I asked him about the grill, Chris Mannix, because I want, I'm business minded, and surprisingly, George Foreman, man, as powerful and intimidating as he is, he's a humble man. He's a humble person and that just makes him grander. And his answers were crazy. I had a good time talking to him. He was a wonderful man, intimidating, beautiful, big, but humble, and that's what made him such a great figure.
He had a unique career, to say the least. Back in the 70s, he was kind of this menacing figure, viewed as kind of an ill-tempered guy, back when he fought Ali and back when he beat Joe Frazier. Over the 20 years between his title reigns, he was a pastor. There's a lot of stories about how he would speak to people in the streets and churches. And then when he was kind of at his heaviest, I think he was over 300 pounds at some point in the 80s, he decided to mount a comeback and, did it, succeeded, beat Michael Moore in one of the greatest heavyweight title moments that we've ever seen. And in the aftermath of that, or right around that same time, like I said, he became this larger than life figure because of this Foreman grill, which, it was in a lot of places, but it definitely was in like every college dorm. I can tell you that, because over the course of my 4 years in college, I had two of them. I had one my junior year in my apartment and one my senior year in my apartment. And I cooked on it, Sergio, like every single day. And I tell you, I can't think of, I'm sure I'm missing somebody off the top of my head, but like, has there ever been an athlete who has been as successful as George Foreman was, a two-time heavyweight champion with reigns that span multiple decades, who is known more for something he did outside of
I
his
know
sport?
one. I know one, and it's just because he happens to be my favorite fighter who spanned 5 decades, and that's Roberto Duran. But other than that, those two, it's rare. It's a rarity. And if you are going
No,
to
but
mention,
my point is, Sergio, I'm not talking about that. My point is, like, Roberto Duran wasn't known for anything outside the ring. Like
that's
he
knocking out a horse.
well, yeah, but the success, like George Foreman earned more money
I know what you're
selling and
saying,
hawking those damn grills than he ever made as a boxer. And he made some
Chris.
good money as a boxer.
Chris, I gotta commend you first of all. That article you wrote on George Foreman, brilliant, man. That last paragraph, I have to give you your credit. That was a well written, well articulated, heartfelt, and the way you finished it in the end. That's what you know me. I always criticize your writing. You really did him well, man. I recommend everyone to read it because if you didn't know George Foreman and you want to go inside a life of his from when he was a teenager to his peak, the Olympic gold medal to winning a title, losing it, and all that, it was in your article and you wrote it out pretty brilliantly. But yeah, man. no one has that life. Forget boxing career, life. And it starts with the Olympic gold medal and then all the way to 47 years old, 45 years old, winning the championship again. That's unheard of.
Yeah, 68 Olympics, beating Joe Frazier, fighting Ali in the Rumble in the Jungle, reinventing himself later in life. It was really a remarkable life that George Foreman read. And as much as I would like to take credit, Sergio, for the article you're talking about, that was not my story. That was written by Richard Hoffer. I just tweeted it out for him because Richard is not a social media guy.
No wonder it was so good. Oh my
I
goodness.
knew I was walking
Oh
into
my,
that.
no, I'm not making fun of you there. I really related to the article. It was a brilliant article. What's his name again?
Richard Hoffer, one of the great boxing writers in SI history, retired from the game probably about 10, 15 years ago. And he's fantastic. And he covered Foreman extensively during his time in boxing. So, yes, I do recommend one way or the other, whoever who wrote it, reading that story because Hoffer did a great job with it. All right, Sergio, I don't know how you transition from what we're
Your
talking
writing's
about.
no good. That's how we transition. Let's go.
No, I mean, yes, we can do that too. But I now want to talk about Jake Paul because that's where we're going to lead the show off.
From greatness to the clown show. Okay, let's transition like that.
Jake Paul, fresh off a win over former heavyweight champion Mike Tyson, he is targeting a more recent title holder. Take a listen.
I know my boundaries. I want to fight Anthony Joshua exclusive because I know that I will fucking beat Anthony Joshua's ass. I know I will
got knocked out, right?
Yeah. He doesn't have a chin and he has no skill and he's stiff. And I love you, Anthony. We're friends, all this shit, but I want to fight you.
Yeah, that's right. For his next trick, Jake wants to take on the former unified champion, Anthony Joshua. Joshua has not fought since that knockout loss to Danny Dubois back in September. He has been hoping for a showdown with Tyson Fury. So far, that has not materialized. His promoter, Eddie Hearn, was asked about the possibility of a Joshua Paul fight. Here's what he had to say.
This is the first time I've spoken about the fight. To be honest, like, I look at it and I think Jake Paul against Anthony Joshua. I mean, look, for me, we'll do it for the banter. Do you know what I mean? Like, AJ would fight Jake Paul. He'd fight anyone, to be honest with you.
Well, Sergio, I know you have opinions on Jake Paul, so I'll let you go first. What do you think? Are you interested in Jake Paul, Anthony Joshua?
Hell no, I'm not interested. I wasn't interested in Mike Tyson. We've seen how that went. I mean, he embarrassed a great fighter in Mike Tyson, a senior citizen, a damn near 60-year-old man. And now if he fights Anthony Joshua, it's strictly a money grab on his end, and it'll be the flip side on that. Instead of him doing the embarrassing, he'll be embarrassed in that fight. There's no way he can compete with a man that's going to outweigh him by 40, 50 pounds. He's going to be shorter by like 5-6 inches. The reach is incredible. The power. Mind you, this is a real boxer, a gold medalist for Great Britain, a 2-time heavyweight champion, and still one of the biggest punchers in boxing. I don't want to see this fight because it's going to be a one-sided fight. It's going to be a beat down. Jake Paul will get beat down. It'll be ugly too, but he's going to get rich doing it. So no, I'm going to be a hater on this one. I don't want him to get rich and laugh even harder all the way to the bank on another fight. I'm tired of Jake Paul fighting guys that are not on his level. First, there was an old man in Mike Tyson, and now it's a guy that he can't beat in Anthony Joshua, but he'll sell and be popular. Either way, he's going to get rich. I don't want to see it.
I mean, there are easier ways for Jake Paul to get rich than getting in the ring with Anthony Joshua. I mean, that is a dangerous way to get rich. I mean, Jake Paul is a competent boxer. Like, he can beat some of these non-threatening cruiserweights that he fought over the last couple of years. He can be competitive, even beat someone like Tommy Fury, who's got a little bit more experience. But against Anthony Joshua, he has no chance. Absolutely no chance. And I'm actually a little bit surprised that Jake Paul really wants this. Look, we know what Jake Paul's wanted, over the last couple of months. First, it was the matchup with Canelo, which according to Jake was signed, sealed, and almost delivered before Canelo pivoted to the William Skull fight. Then we now later learned that there was a deal for Jake Paul to fight Gervonta Davis in an exhibition. Not really sure what that would have looked like, but Gervonta is a 135-pounder. Jake fought at 230 or in that neighborhood in his last fight. So I don't know what that would have looked like. Now here he is saying, I want to fight Anthony Joshua. Jake's smart to know that even though Anthony Joshua is past his best days And even though his chin is suspect, Jake does not have the power to test that chin. He doesn't hit like that. And Anthony Joshua, just like we saw against Francis Ngannou, if you stand there in front of him, he will put you down. I mean, Francis Ngannou had a lot of momentum in the aftermath of that narrow loss that he had to Tyson Fury. He went 10 rounds with Fury. That's credible. That's legitimate. He steps in with Anthony Joshua and boom, 2 rounds in, he's tasting the canvas. So I'll give Jake Paul this, that's a dangerous way to earn some money. My thing, Sergio, is I don't think Anthony Joshua can do it, because I think if Anthony Joshua does it, it kind of formally ends his career, right? Like, he's been sort of waiting in the weeds to see if Tyson Fury is going to come back. And we all assume Tyson is going to come back. But if he decides to go this route, I don't know that you can do it and then come back and compete for a heavyweight title. You kind of move into a different phase of your career. So for that reason, I don't want to see it. I'd much rather see Anthony Joshua in a rematch against Daniel Dubois, against Joseph Parker in a rematch. Parker's been on a great run as of late. There are other British guys out there. Let's say Joe Joyce beats Filip Hrgović next month. Maybe you do Joshua versus Joyce, later this summer. There's just a lot of good regular boxing options for AJ that can make him a lot of money. Going down the route of Jake Paul, I just don't think he's ready for that yet. I think he has still too much boxing left in him.
I agree, and I still want to see Anthony Joshua, Tyson Fury. Yeah, Daniel Dubois makes a lot of sense. Hrgović makes a lot of sense. Joseph Parker. There's a lot of them. Anthony Joshua is going to be the A side to all of those, except Tyson Fury, and that fight will still sell. That still will do great numbers, and in Wembley, people will still want to pay for that fight. It'll do great. But I don't want to see Jake Paul. I just don't want to see Jake Paul anymore. I don't want to see him against real professional fighters. And if I do want to see him against a professional fighter, someone that's even with him, even in stature and size and age and strength, then I'll give him credit. Then I'll have to applaud his effort. Then I'll start saying, you know what? He really picked up the game late. He's a hard worker. He has the resources to advance faster than most, but he's not doing that. And for that reason, I'm going to continue being his biggest critic, because he doesn't deserve the money he's making against the opponents that he's facing. And that's the reason I'm being a hater. Other than that, hey, I've already gone on the Jake Paul train. I said, hey, I applauded him. I said he was a master showman. He was a master marketer. But as a boxer, he still hasn't got my respect. He still has not got my respect, Chris Mannix. But you keep bringing him up. So here we are.
Look, it's fair for you as an ex-champion to say that you don't respect Jake Paul. But I would remind you that Earn's got nothing to do with it. Like, Jake Paul earned this platform that he has. He earned this following that he has. And he has been he has successfully been able to move that audience into the boxing space to the point where they're watching him in good numbers. They're buying pay-per-views in good numbers. He has been able to get Netflix on board to grow the brand even further. So deserves got nothing to do with it when it comes with Jake Paul. I just think there are more interesting fights that I would like to see Jake Paul in, like this KSI blood feud that he's got with Logan, being partners with KSI and Jake and KSI going back and forth for years. That's a huge event, in the US or more likely in the UK. You could do a rematch with Tommy Fury, try to get your get back also over in the UK. I just think for Jake, yeah, you'd make a pile of money fighting Anthony Joshua, but you'd pay a price, man. You'd pay a big price. Anthony Joshua is going to put you out. It's simple as that. You're not on AJ's level. And I think you'd learn pretty quickly there's a difference between Tommy Fury punching you and 58-year-old Mike Tyson punching you and 35-year-old Anthony Joshua throwing right hands ultimately in your face. All right, let's go back to traditional boxing. Let's talk about Terrence Crawford, who is gearing up for a planned September showdown against Canelo Alvarez. A lot on the line for Crawford in this fight. His undefeated record, a chance to regain his place at the top of the pound-for-pound rankings. And Crawford sees a lot to gain here for himself, too. Specifically, a status he believes that he has earned among the all-time greats. In an interview with Ring Magazine, Crawford said that if he beats Canelo Alvarez, he deserves to be considered a top 3 fighter of all time, right up there alongside Sugar Ray Robinson, widely viewed as boxing's GOAT, and Muhammad Ali, whose credentials speak for themselves. Do you agree with that assessment, Sergio? Would Bud Crawford be a top 3 fighter all time if he beats Canelo Alvarez?
No, but I respect Bud Crawford's mentality and I respect his accomplishments. And look, you got to call yourself great before the world does. And that's what he's doing. He's probably going to end his career undefeated. He will probably, a lot of people think he'll be.
Wait. You're picking him to beat Canelo?
I said probably.
Okay.
He would.
That implies you're picking him, though.
Listen, man, it's going to be a tough fight for Canelo. He will probably end up picking up undisputed in a third weight division. That's the accolade
again
there.
Implying that you're picking him to beat Canelo by saying probably.
First, let me answer your question. All right, this isn't will Bud Crawford beat Canelo Alvarez. I'm not. That's not the question you asked me. All right, top 3 or top 4. I don't even put Bud Crawford in top 5. I mean, you're talking about all-time greatness. I mean, Ali Robinson, Sugar Ray Robinson, Roberto Duran. He's my top 5. Henry Armstrong, Joe Louis. You can't put Bud Crawford in that mix. And then if you look at the back the top 10, you can maybe squeeze them in there, but no, man. I just think there's way too many greats that have come before you. And if you look at Bud Crawford's resume, and it's not his fault, this is another thing about, not the great fighters nowadays. They don't have a B-side. They don't have the Hall of Famers on their record. The names we just mentioned, you can look down their record as Hall of Fame, great after great after great after great. He doesn't have that. Who's a Hall of Famer in the next 5 years that Bud Crawford has faced?
Spence.
Maybe Errol Spence.
Maybe.
Okay, there you go. Maybe one. All right, one out of over 40 fights or whatever it is. So it's not enough. It's not enough. But his accolades are going to be great to where he's one of the best fighters of our generation. Great fighter of our generation. He's been at the top of the pound for pound list for so long. He's the goods. He's a great fighter. He's everything great that you want in a boxer and a puncher. But all time, I would have to say no.
So the argument for Bud Crawford being top 3 is the belts, right? Like there's never been a 3-division undisputed champion in the 4-belt era. Not on the men's side anyway. Clarissa Shields has done it on the women's side. But in the men's side, there's never been a 3-division undisputed champion. That is a pretty significant accomplishment to do it at 140 and then all the way up to 168, winning titles at 2 weight classes in between. So he would be a 5-division champion at that point, 34, yeah, skipping 60. That's the argument for. It would be historic for him to go up to beat Canelo Alvarez at 168, having never fought above 154 and only fighting once above 147. So that's the argument for. My argument against is similar to yours. There are just other fighters that have more quality wins. I mean, if you look at the resume of Bud Crawford, if it goes the way it goes, Canelo would be the best win on his resume. To jump up and beat Canelo would easily be number 1. Then you've got Errol Spence. After that, probably Madrimov. Maybe you can argue Sean Porter is there.
Yeah, but let me stop you. Let me stop you there. There's asterisks to the Errol Spence. I mean, when you really break it down, it was after that horrific car accident. You can't say it was the same Spence. That's one. Canelo Alvarez, I mean, he's at the end of his career. He's not beating the absolute best Canelo. He's not beating different champions at 168. He's beating one guy that has all the belts to become undisputed. That's not his fault, but it might be prime picking for a man that has well over 65 fights in Canelo. He's been fighting since he was 15 years old professionally, has injury after injury, and is at the end of his career. So I'm not being a hater here, man. I'm just keeping it real here. So if you really break down the names and the numbers, it's kind of like Clarissa Shields. We're talking about 3-division undisputed champions. Clarissa doesn't have the competition either. I mean, that's women's boxing, totally separate. But it's the same argument I have with her as well when we call her the GOAT. It's just you don't have the competition. You don't have the plan B. You don't have the Amanda Serranos to face. You don't have the Katie Taylors. You have good fighters, but not great fighters in that weight division. But Crawford's in the same boat.
I would say this, though. Errol Spence, at the time of the Crawford fight, was a top 10 pound-for-pound guy. You look at most of the rankings around that time. In hindsight, we can look back and say, yes, the accident, the wear and tear, that took something out of Errol Spence. And I agree that it did, but the reality is he was a top 10 pound-for-pound guy. No, Canelo is not the killer that he was between 2018 and 2022, but he is still a top 10 pound-for-pound guy. So those would be 2 wins over widely viewed top pound-for-pound guys still in that prime window, maybe the back end of the prime window, but still in that prime window. I still think, despite that if you want to make a top 10 all-time list, there are other fighters that have better resumes. You mentioned Roberto Duran. That could be one. Sugar Ray Leonard is another one. Look at Sugar Ray Leonard's resume. His 3 best wins in no particular order, I would say Roberto Duran, Tommy Hearns, and Marvin Hagler. You could throw Donnie Lalonde onto that list as well, because Ray's often told you and me that was one of not his toughest fight.
Benitez in that list as well.
I'm sort of just throwing names out there, the guys that I think were his biggest wins. Oscar De La Hoya, how about his name there? Pernell Whitaker, Fernando Vargas, Ike Quartey, couple of wins over Chavez, beat Gennaro Hernandez. These are guys with deep resumes at multiple weight classes. And that, more than belts, that's what matters. The resume ultimately matters. And look, I think Crawford is paying a price because he spent a significant number of years, the formative years of his career, being iced out of the big fights in the welterweight division, right? Like, he was iced out of a fight against Danny Garcia, against Yordenis Ugas, even Mikey Garcia. He got Sean Porter at the very end of Porter's career. Spence got all the guys that I mentioned, fought Porter when he was a world champion, fought Kell Brook when Kell Brook was still a world champion. So I think we might look at Crawford a little bit differently had he not spent those welterweight years being forced to take kind of the also-rans that were outside of the PBC universe, when he was affiliated with Top Rank and they couldn't make a deal to do a fight together. So that's kind of a long way of saying, like, I do think he's outside the top 3. Does it get him inside the top 20? Yeah, I'd probably go that far. I think that would be that significant an accomplishment. But his resume just doesn't hold up when you go one by one down the list of these other great fighters and the other fighters they've fought.
I have to agree with you. In our generation, Manny Pacquiao, Oscar De La Hoya, these are incredible fighters that did it for a long time, decade after decade. They were superstars and they beat the absolute best. And if you look down their resume, they're beating Hall of Famers and great fighters as well. But Crawford, unfortunately, doesn't have that. And it's not just Bud Crawford. It's a lot of fighters that are going to enter the Hall of Fame in the past 5 years and the next 5 years, where they're entering the Hall of Fame, but they don't have Hall of Fame names on their resume. They probably have 1 or 2 at the most. And it's not a knock on them. It's just that's who they're facing now. And then inactivity is another thing, Mannix. Inactivity is another thing. Bud Crawford hasn't been inactive, but we look at the guy that we're talking about, Errol Spence. That's another thing outside of the car accident. He was inactive, fighting once a year, for the last 4 or 5 years before he fought Bud. It's just a different generation, and he's having to beat different fighters, and it's not a knock on him. He's a great fighter. He will be a Hall of Famer, first ballot, and he will be all-time one of the greatest, but not top 3, not top 5, maybe top 15. But I'm glad that he thinks he's that great, because that's how you're supposed to think as a fighter.
All right, so Bud Crawford still has one version of the 154-pound title. Sebastian Fundora has 2 versions of it, and he was back in action on Saturday, ending a 1-year layoff, defeating Cordell Booker by 4th-round knockout to defend his unified championship. Fundora will now target bigger fights later this summer, which could include a unification fight with Bakram Murtsalayev, who has the IBF belt, and a title defense against mandatory challenger Xander Zayas, who was in Las Vegas in the ring talking up a showdown with Fundora later this summer. Takeaways, thoughts from watching Fundora against Booker? Pretty one-sided fight through 4 rounds.
I expected. Booker wasn't anything special. I mean, he's already been knocked out before in the first round by Ammo Williams. I didn't think much of him. He was a sucker for the main punch that Fundora's really good at, and that's the uppercut. Yeah. For being a 6'6" fighter with an 80-inch wingspan, he throws vicious uppercuts, and that's the reason fighters get in trouble. And that's the reason, Tim Tszyu ran into that elbow, is because of those uppercuts. Because his forearms are eye level to his opponents. All right. So it's not his fault. He's landing forearms and elbows on opponents. He's trying to land uppercuts. But yeah, he's going to be hard to beat. He's going to be hard to beat because you don't find sparring partners that tall, that big, that long. Not only that, he's a smart southpaw. He takes a big punch. He's tough. He has good technique, somewhat. I mean, not great technique, but he has good technique. And he goes to the body. He does everything right, pretty much. How do you prepare for a guy like that, Chris Mannix? I fought a guy that was 6'4.5" one time. I couldn't find sparring partners for him. I had one sparring partner, and he was my Kingsley Akiki. He was 6'4", good fighter. But he helped me get prepared for this guy. Who the hell am I going to get to prepare for Fundora? A southpaw that's 6'6". You don't. So you just got to be in great shape, come in with a game plan, and you got to punch in between the shots. But you can't prepare for guys like that. You just got to fight them.
Fundora is great TV. He is a lot of fun to watch because you look at him, and I think it would be pretty easy for him to fight a very boring style and win a lot of wide decisions. I mean, with that 80-inch wingspan, he could just fight behind a jab the entire time, go the 12-round distance, and probably still have an undefeated record. He chooses not to fight that way, and that's what makes him fun. And it's also what makes him a little bit vulnerable, and why we're not looking at him as being like the dominant presence at 154, an unbeatable presence at 154. I mean, the Brian Mendoza fight where he lost, I mean, he was up big. He was pitching a shutout up until getting caught, but he decided to rumble with Mendoza, and he got hit with a monster shot that put him down and out. I mean, he beat up Erickson Lubin pretty good, but he got knocked down in that fight because he likes to rumble with you. He wants to bang on the inside, and his chin is pretty good, but he can get rocked and he can get dropped. So I just think he's one of the most television-friendly fighters that's out there, because you have these great fight weeks where it looks like you're watching a battle out of Gulliver's Travels, where you have the 6'6" junior middleweight, who, by the way, came in more than a full pound under the 154-pound limit. Ridiculous. He's almost 6'6", and he's weighing 152 and change. Ridiculous that happens. And you have this great buildup with him, with all these visuals, all these pictures of him against much smaller guys, and then he gets in the ring and he bangs it out. If you're like to beat Fundora, I think you got to have two things. I think one, you probably got to be a southpaw. I think southpaws would have more success.
You just fought a southpaw.
Well, I mean, I'm saying like a dangerous southpaw. Like I'm thinking back to, like, remember Sergio Martinez against Paul Williams? Like, yeah. Paul Williams didn't have the stature necessarily. He was right around there, actually. He was a big guy.
A tall, lanky southpaw, just like Fundora. Yeah.
Right. But like Sergio Martinez, also southpaw. Like, and he wound up clipping him with a monster shot that put Paul Williams down on the deck. I think that's one way to do it. And you have to have power. Like, Brian Mendoza, for all of his flaws, has crunching power. Like, that's how he got to him. Erickson Lubin can bang as well. Like, I don't think you can outbox Sebastian Fundora, because the second he recognizes that you can't hurt him, which Cordell Booker could not do, he's just putting the pressure on and chasing you around the ring until you eventually fold. Now, number one, I hope this leads to a very active 2025. Like, I don't want to see Fundora having to sit on the sidelines for another 9 months to a year. He's got to get back in as early as the summer, and he's in a division where there are some good options out there for him, Sergio. Like, Xander Zayas is the mandatory challenger. I was talking to some people close to Zayas on Sunday. They were saying Monday morning, we are going to press the WBO to order the fight against Xander Zayas, to formally order that fight and to get the chains moving on making that fight happen. Fundora doesn't really seem to back down from anybody, so I'm sure he'd take that fight. The Murtalayev fight is interesting. It's more dangerous because I think Murtalayev has that blend of talents that I'm talking about. Like, he can bang. Tim Tszyu can attest to that. But that would be a big title unification fight. I think if I'm Fundora, I'm probably more open to the Zayas fight first, because I think that's a better fight for him. Zayas is a tremendously skilled guy, but he doesn't have that power. And I just don't know if he can go the full 12 against the pressure of someone like Fundora. So if I'm Fundora and I'm looking at an active 2025, I'd probably look at Zayas first as early as this summer. I mean, he should be able to turn around pretty quick after that 4 rounds with Booker. And then end of the year, get that unification fight against Murtalayev. That would be my take on it.
You don't need power to beat Fundora. You need timing and accuracy. You need to learn how to time those punches. You loop shots over the top. That's another thing. That's a strategy thing. But I would like to see him in with a Zayas. I would like to see him in with any of those fighters you just mentioned at 154. But I don't think, and this is my opinion, Fundora's going to want those guys. He wants a name now. He's a champion. He's a unified champion. He doesn't want to fight these up and comers, these young bucks, these undefeated guys that are barely on the come up. How about an old former champion? How about an old name, someone that's still relevant? I think that's what Fundora is going to go for next. Because if you look at Sebastian Fundora's resume, he has an incredible resume. His last 10, 15 fights, either unbeaten fighters or once beaten fighters. He's not facing losers. Go all the way down to his pro debut. He's fighting the goods. He's fighting guys with really, really good records. 1, 2, 3 losses max. You don't normally see that, but when you're dealing with an anomaly like him, he's forced to fight whoever they put in front of him, and he's been doing a great job doing it. And he's a hard worker too. Hard work. He used to train with Ben Lira in South El Monte, and I'm a big fan of that gym. Great sparring. They work hard, and he has everything you want in a talent. Plus, he's from a boxing family with his sister also being a champion. So everything great for Sebastian, and I'm happy and proud of him. But it's going to be tough to beat him. I'll tell you that.
Well, the name you're talking about, the former champion, is Spence, and that's the fight that we thought we were going to get late last year. It never materialized, and now we're kind of left to wonder, what is Errol Spence going to do next? He has not indicated he's going to retire, so he still is out there as a potential opponent. But Sergio, if I'm Errol Spence, do I really want to do that? Do I want to come off a 2-year layoff and fight this monster? No. I mean, you're always talking about matchmaking. Errol Spence by the time a Fundora fight will have come around, it will be about 2 years since the Spence has been in the ring. He was destroyed the last time out. Like, if he's going to move up to 154, you're not going to fight anyone that looks like Fundora, but at least get a fight and get your confidence back at that weight before you go into a Fundora matchup.
I think will beat Fundora because he has timing and accuracy and loops his shots, but Fundora's going to have to move up in weight is Carlos Adames. I think Adames, 1, will take that fight. 2, has the style to beat him, and 3, he's a champion. So
yeah, but what's the motivation for Fundora to do stuff like that?
That's what I said. I'm just throwing guys out there that I know will do great. Has a style matchup and the strategy and the game plan to beat a Fundora, and it's guys like Adames. But at 154, man, it's gonna be tough to find one. I don't think it's Errol. I don't think it's Zoo. I don't think it's none of these guys. It's gonna be
let me make the case though for the plan that I laid out there. Like, a Zayas fight, I think, is marketable. Like, Zayas has been promoted pretty well by Top Rank. He's starting to develop a following in New York City. Zayas said over the weekend that if he can get a Fundora fight, he'd love to make it at Madison Square Garden. You could probably do a big crowd there. It's that Mexican-Puerto Rican rivalry that we all love. I think for Fundora, he would go in as a pretty heavy favorite just because I haven't seen the power from Zayas at this point. And then the Murtalayev fight, even though it is dangerous because Murtalayev is pretty good, if you can beat Murtalayev, all of a sudden you can go into 2026, not only with 3 fights and 3 belts, but all of a sudden you're looking at Crawford and thinking like, look, if Bud, let's say he beats Canelo, or even if he loses to Canelo, and he still wants to be a 3-time undisputed champion. If Fundora has 3 belts to his name, Crawford could come back down and fight Fundora for the undisputed championship at 54. He could get all 4 belts in one more fight. And I think that would be appealing to Terrence Crawford if he wants to keep going after the Canelo fight.
I don't think Crawford would want to do that. Why is he going to work so hard? Say he does beat Canelo and becomes 3-time undisputed. He should go into the sunset there. Why do you want to go fight someone like this? That's an ideal career for me. Retire undefeated, retire on top, and do something that a lot of.
But would you want, Sergio? Would you want to be a 4-time undisputed champion? Like, that's in the 4-belt era. That would never happen again. I just don't believe it would ever happen again.
Yeah, that is tempting. I'm not going to lie. That is tempting, but I mean, it's just way too much. You're biting way too much. Fundora it's tough to prepare from. No matter how great you are, and Bud Crawford is a great fighter, you're still having to deal with the size disadvantage. I mean, Bud's 5'8" at most? You're dealing with 6'6.5". That reach alone. And you're talking about Fundora being an exciting fighter. How about for this fight, he decides to just want to win and fight behind that jab and fight long and fight like that character from Street Fighter. His name is Dalzum, where he had that long reach. And you can't get past that. So you could do that for about 6, 7, 8 rounds, and then win a decision. It's a great fighter like Bud Crawford because it's going to be hard to beat that disparity, that disadvantage. I don't like that fight for Bud. I just don't like it.
I thought you were going to go with E Honda there with the long jab, the sumo wrestler with the wide punching. I don't know. Either way, Fundora's got options. I want to see him stay busy. I want to see him stay active. I want to see him in some big fights. He's great television, as we saw against Booker, and he needs to be active moving forward. Also on Saturday, Sergio, George Kambosos, he got back to his winning ways, beating late replacement Jake Wiley by unanimous decision. Not the most impressive performance, if we're being honest. Wiley took the fight on less than a week's notice and had never fought close to a world level. But Kambosos, he got the job done, setting up a showdown against 140-pound champion Richardson Hitchins. Let's start with the fight itself, Sergio, because you came into this fight thinking Kambosos was going to knock Wiley out. Were you impressed with Kambosos' debut at junior welterweight?
For about 6 rounds, I was. Yeah. I mean, he controlled the fight. That left hand couldn't miss. He was fighting an opponent he wasn't prepared for. And Wiley had power. I mean, you could tell that he was respecting the power of Wiley. Wiley had 15 knockouts in like 16 fights, something like that. That's power. He's younger, stronger, and no matter how experienced, Kambosos had to take his time. The second half of the fight was a different story, especially like the last 4 rounds. That's where I think the younger, stronger fighter started actually doing better. But the main thing here is he was a late replacement, man. I've been here before. You don't look good against late replacements. You're trained for a totally, completely different style. And then all of a sudden, within less than 5 days notice, just to save the show, you have to fight some guy that you're not preparing for. You're not going to look good against him, no matter how prepared you are. So I give Kambosos a lot of credit for going through the fight, winning the fight, and just put this behind you. Yes, he didn't look great, but he also didn't look bad. I think for half that fight, he looked slick, he looked sharp, he looked strong. I would even say a little bit more than half the fight. 7 rounds, he looked slick and strong. Get past this fight, on to the next one. I give it a solid B+. I'm not hating against Kambosos. He did everything expected from him. So good for him.
Yeah, I give him a C+. I get what you're saying. Late replacements, you're not preparing for that guy. They're tough to figure out. Probably not a ton of film out there on Jake Wiley, given his resume up until that point. The knockout numbers don't really impress me. He's done it all on domestic level, and just 2 years earlier, he was knocked out by a guy that was 0-2. So I can't give Kambosos that much of an excuse. I did think he had his moments early on. He looked like the more experienced fighter, but to your point, like towards the second half of the fight, Wiley was landing some shots, able to be physical with him. Didn't look like he was hurt at all by anything Kambosos was throwing. Obviously, there was a cut with Kambosos in the 10th round, I think, of the fight, where he had to deal with that over the final few. But I thought it was okay, C+, B- type of performance. And really, Sergio, it didn't give me any reason to believe that Kambosos can be competitive with Richardson Hitchins. Like, he's had a lot to say about Hitchins over the last few months, and even afterwards, he was calling him chinchins and said that Wiley has more power than him and all this stuff that you expect George Kambosos to say. But Richardson Hitchins, you would agree, is the real deal. Like, he is a legit guy who is bigger, stronger, younger than Kambosos, operates behind a stiff jab, has good power behind that right hand, did a great job in his win over Liam Paro. I don't know how you solve that if you're George Kambosos, coming up in weight to a weight class where Hitchins is the most comfortable. Like, Hitchins, yeah, he'll have to be subject to the IBF 10-pound rehydration rule, but he's going to be a lot bigger than George Kambosos on fight night. That's going to be a really tough fight for Kambosos to win. And that's kind of how I was viewing that fight. Like, if he had gone out and blown the doors off Wiley, showed power at 140, maybe you start thinking to yourself, did he squeeze himself down to 135 for too long? But everything big that he landed, Wiley just kind of shook off. And those are the kind of shots that are not going to affect someone like Richardson Hitchins. So I believe we're going to get that fight next. I think it could happen as early as June 21st in Las Vegas. But I didn't come away from that fight thinking that that's going to be all that competitive.
So what? I still want to see it because Kambosos is still a fight, and he's still a former champion. He's still, has only been stopped one time, and that's by a great fighter in Lomachenko. He comes up short with the great names, and Hitchins is not a great name yet. So I don't care. I still want to see that fight, and we still don't know. Yes, all the things you just mentioned, all the adjectives that you just mentioned to describe Richardson Hitchins, you forgot the most important one: disciplined. It's hard to beat a guy like that. Discipline is the main one. But is he tough? Is he resilient? Can he take a punch? These are 3 unanswered questions that we have of Hitchins, and you can bet Kambosos will try to test those. He brings the experience. He knows how to fight in and out, break the distance really fast. I want that fight. I'm interested.
Hey, also shout out to Kambosos, who completes this Australian victory tour with a lot more money in his bank account than what began. I mean, Keith Idek and I were talking about this a little bit last week. I don't think there's a fighter in history that financially capitalized more on one win than George Kambosos did. I mean, Keith brought up the fact that Leon Spinks didn't capitalize on his win over Muhammad Ali as much as George Kambosos did against Teofimo Lopez. He has made well north of $10 million, probably north of $20 million. I don't think he got a big payday for this fight this past weekend, but still made some money, got a win on his resume, and now will be able to collect another check against Richardson Hitchins with the possibility of a Teofimo rematch still out there, win or lose. Like, it's crazy, but there will probably still be some level of interest. Like, say, for example, Teofimo loses to Arnold Barboza, which we both believe is possible, and Kambosos loses a competitive fight against Richardson Hitchins. You're going to tell me that they wouldn't make Teofimo against Kambosos next? Come on. Of course they would. So that win for Kambosos is the gift that keeps on giving. It really is. It's remarkable how much money he's been able to make off that fight. All right. When we come back, we will take some of your questions from social media.